Thank you for making us interview you today. We're going to start with your childhood. Can you tell me like your name, when you were born, and where?
My name is Eugene Gonzalez. I was born on the 6th of March in 1932 in the then called British Guyana, which is now known as Republic of Guyana.
So you were born in, well, before the First World War. Can you tell me, sorry, First or Second World War, can you tell me about your childhood, please, and any memories of childhood?
Well, as far as I can remember in my childhood, it was one primarily difficult, as you would know, living in those countries. In that time, life was a struggle for parents, and we coped through all the difficulties. During the war days, we had shortages of basic foodstuffs, etc. But being a very big and productive country, there are a lot of local food grown, which subsidize for the shortfalls. I had a very good education, and as you know, coming back to financial situation, for you to push further in the educational side is very hard. Your parents cannot afford, most of them. I did my best by getting through to GCs, that you may call it, etc. And I had my first assignment, educational assignment I took up. I was studying to be a doctor. I worked in a pharmacy in the early years. But as again, the struggle was that I had to leave and to do other manual jobs so that I can face the present world and its situation and take some of the burden off your parents. So I went out my own way, and eventually, as I was doing a job as an outdoor salesman for Pepsi Cola International. At that time, the company was the largest concern in our country. Money-wise, our payments were very, very up to standard, and that in itself afforded us then to start building a comfortable life before I decided to immigrate.
Going back to your childhood, can you tell me any memories fondly thinking back about your family? Tell me about your family.
I can tell you, it's a very strange scenario. My mother always says to me, I'm going to push you to the limits educational wise. I been a little toughie when I was young, a very little tougher, and my favorite sport was boxing. Eventually, one day, instead of going to my normal lessons, I used to go to we call them drugstores, where they do drugs and things, and I was working along there and learning to do the necessaries. And I suddenly decide I'm going to quit that, and I'm going to head away where there's boxing. And my mom never ever forgive me for leading away like that, which I think in the long term, I wasn't that successful, that it was very tough. I went into the fight game and all sorts of things. But the benefits I got from it allow me that I can go anywhere and I think I'll be capable enough of looking after myself. I don't need a mum, I don't need anybody to cater for me. And if I get into any difficulties, I was that tough and I learned a lot. So that was the only compensation I get from it. But as I said, my mum never ever forgive me for doing a runner. So that was one of my basic experiences I always remember.
Have you got any other experiences? Have you got any to do with like your cousins, your uncles and aunts?
Confrontation-wise?
No, just general situations.
General
life, day-to-day life, which sums up how you feel about back home.
Yeah, you really put me through something, but I'll give you one little thing which whenever me and my cousins got together, we always talk about it. Now, where we were living at the time, the land was very low. So when the tide comes in, there's always a flood situation. So the local authorities then they built an inbuilt culvert to prevent the water coming in on the living areas and things like that. We were up in the place messing about one day, and we suddenly decided we gotta pull this thing and see if it's gonna open. Eventually it did open and the water started rushing in. within a space of 2 hours, people's homes and everything was flooded. And we were wrapped on knuckles. And it's an experience that we always remember, we always talk about it. And we take it as a playful act, but it was a very detrimental act in the long term. And that's one of my basic memories of my childhood days.
I'm just going to stop the tape for a minute. Yeah.
Hurry up, Natasha.
That was getting... Don't worry, we should have checked that before actually. So, that's how I thought. Are we going to continue? Do you want to cut me in or just go on as normal? School. You mentioned when you were growing up it was called British Guyana.
Yeah.
Can you recall any so-called British influences to do with your education?
Yes. Normally, or currently, to be correct, Guyana is in South America, and it's the only English-speaking country on the continent of South America. And that mainly due to the fact that we were under British rule, and we were given this British and English teaching. It goes back a very long time, and everything that operates here in England, we had the same educational standards and everything in Guyana. So that is one of the things that we have inherited. We could hardly speak Spanish, which is the normal language spoken in the whole of South America.
I'm going to talk about religion. Did religion play a big part in your life?
Yes. The way I would define it, because I was born in a Catholic home. I went to a Catholic school, and everything I do, or the parents did, were mainly surrounded by the Catholic religion principles. And as I mentioned early on, I was just a little buddy on my own I remember in the Catholic, one of the Catholic principles on Good Fridays, you have your last meal sometime after midnight on Thursday, and you wouldn't have another meal until after midnight on Friday. And that never goes down well with me. So I always steal a bit, a handful of rice here, something here, something, hide it away, nip into the bushes, and do my own little thing. And when my mom caught up with me, obviously I was given a good hiding for doing that, breaking their home rule. Well, as I said, I've been around and I've gone into different situations, and I'm still a true believer in Christianity and things like that. But I haven't stuck firmly to Catholic principles or any other. I'm just open-minded as I go along.
I'm not sure whether you mentioned it, but how many other members, how many brothers and sisters did you have altogether?
Well, I've got no brothers, and I've got 3 sisters. And so you can imagine what I used to go through, 3 girls around me, and I'm the only boy. Knocked me about when they were ready. So unfortunately, I never had any brothers.
So what number child were you?
I was number 2. I was number 2.
I'm going to bring you up to your teenage years. Tell me about your teenage years in Guyana.
My teenage years in Guyana is very fruitful and lively. As I says, I used to do a bit of boxing, and then I moved away from that, and I hosted a lot of dances and parties, and I used to be involved in a lot of social activities. But mainly, I always bend backwards to do anything for the elderly people and for the youths. I used to divide my time to help the youths along, because those days were very, very difficult. I remember once they were forming a cricket team in my area, and as I said, my job situation was very good. The firm that I worked with, I could have gone into any major stores around the country and just ask for, can you give me this and I'll pay you later. Our credibility was that good. And I took some lads and bought 2 cricket bats and 2 balls and some cricket stumps so that they can start having a go. And that was part of my character. I love dealing with kids, and I have great respect for the elderly. And I used to do a lot to help. Even though I was bad when I was young, I can remember one old chap, when I was young, used to make his life a misery by stealing his fruits. You call it scrumping. As he winked him up his fruit tree, and I stole his fruits and everything. When I become a teenager and started, I always remembering, and most weekends before I go away on my usual runabout, I used to fetch him out, take him to the nearest bar, sat him down, buy him a drink, and we sat down and we'll have a drink and we'll go over the little bad things. He used to chase after me, and it was a spark in that old chap's life. And I feel very much good in myself for doing things like that. And even unto this day, I always try to do my best for the elderly, which is along the line we've got to pay a lot of respect for older people, and I'm still that same way.
What other kinds of socialising did you get up to in your teenage years?
And well, I play game-wise, I play a bit of cricket. I had one little go at football, and a good friend of mine had his leg broke. And I says, no way, my leg's going to broke, so I stopped it. And as I says, I go out dancing a lot, biking, so I go to parties. I'm that type of person, I'm very much outgoing. And I think that kept me a nice stead up to now, because I've still got the same spirit in mind.
Politically, I don't know much about the political situation in Guyana, but how did it influence your life as a person, a young person?
Politics, it says.
Yes.
Politically.
Yeah, when you were young, when you were in your teenage years and in your 20s.
Right. I had very slight involvement in politics, because I always say at the end of the day, doesn't matter who is in there, life's got to go on. But I remember one time I did take up a little leading role, and mainly to the fact because people were used to deny themselves the voting rights, and they never realized the importance. But I remember that when I'm at home and during election time, I always get around and try to get people to come out. Whoever you wants to vote for, it's your business. I'm not telling you who to do. But at least get out there and use your franchise. But I haven't really played any major political role. My eldest son, he was, and he became one of the youngest member of parliament during the 80s, because he was involved then in politics. But I'd always play a low key.
Now tell me about the time that you decided that you wanted to come to Britain, and why. What were the events leading up to the great day?
Right. Okay. The events leading up to that. In the 1958, a very good friend of mine, who is a deceased now, we were working together in the same firm, same company. I was a salesman, and he was the driver of our vehicle that we used to have. And he had his relation, a sister over here, and he decided to make a change in life. And he came over. I wouldn't like to criticize him because he's dead, but I'd still never forgive him. When he wrote me, he give me all these fairy tales about life over here. And I sat down one day and I said, I'm not going to stop here forever in the day. And I decided I'm going to leave my job and come over here. At the time when I approached my company, tell them about my intentions, what I'm deciding to do, there was an Englishman who was the head of the accounting department, etc., financial advisor, whatever. His name was Mr. Hartrop. I always remember his name, and he's from Kent. He sat me down, and he says, because I requested I want a certificate of being a salesman to walk with. He says, I'll give you your certificate as a salesman, but I can tell you categorically it wouldn't be of any use to you. And if you take my kindly advice, you are in the best job, because I used to be paid every day in the year. I get a daily allowance, a weekly salary, and a monthly sales commission. Free uniforms, free headgears, free shoes, everything. He says, you are in one of the best jobs. If you could have had a job like that in England, but you wouldn't. And he says, I'm going to tell you this. I wouldn't decide to go back to England and live. I would only go for a holiday. So I'm telling you, you're giving up something. But he couldn't get through to me. I finally decided. Okay then, so I leave. Came here in 1960. What month? In the first, I think it was the 1st of September. My one first look as I came out at some Southampton, I said, bloody hell, this is where all these factories and smoke, because it was now September, when smoke is billowing out of these chimneys. I said, there are a lot of factories and things in this first impression. Anyway, I find my way up to Wolverhampton. There was my friend, he meet me and greet me. Put me up in his accommodation. We all stuck up in a little room, quite a few of us. I began to think, I says, this situation looks far different from what I left behind. So anyway. Then comes the next day, we went down to Goodyear's, which he had already seen the management there regarding job situation. Oh yes, I've been through my examination, medical start the next day. That's 2 days after arriving here. Then I started getting my regrets. I went in this first thing, I couldn't stand the smell of the factory. Says anyway, I always have this introvert feeling in me. When you come up to anything and you say you don't like it, you just fight against it. I had that. I says anyway. So I remember when the then foreman took me in, showed me the lockers, tell me to get changed, to come back on the job. Got changed, nice white shirt. Nice. So when I came back out on the shop floor, he said, what's that? Are you? I said, yeah. He said, white shirt? I said, yeah. Well, okay then. And when he took me into my work area, believe you me, I thought it was the end of the world. Went into this place, you couldn't see a thing. Then he says, now if you go in there, I says, where? I says, in there, through that door. And you'd see somebody in there and tell them, I went in and these big machines on top rambling and the place is black, and I run out back. I said, are you sure you're sending me the right place? He says, yes. The name of that area was categorically known as the Black Hole. And believe you me, from the time I'm talking to you there, you couldn't recognize me. I was covered in black. When I went there, this chap, a Jamaican fellow, good friend of mine, his name was Mr. Walters, Percy Walters. Rob Walters says, man, come along, I'll show you around, we'll work together. All I can see is people's eyes twinkling. And when I went home the evening, and he says to me, oh, you're going to get accustomed to it, man. Hang on, you're a tough guy. I says, I know that. You'll get accustomed to it. I couldn't sleep, and my skin was itching all over, this black. But as I says, I'm a born fighter, and I decided I'm going to sweat it out if the grass is greener. And that was my first disappointment. Never stopped to think about wages or anything, When my next disappointment came was when I collect my wages. It was around £6, £5 to put. Well, first thing I started calculating £5 somewhat to the dollars back home. At the time, it used to be 4 and 6 pence to the dollar back home. And when And I realized I'm being paid $1 an hour, four and sixpence an hour, which is the equivalent of today's 22 and a half pence an hour. A packet of crisps, more or less. When I look at this, I says, oh my God. Then I start having the regrets. I start regret. I says, man, how you could have make me leave my good job and come to this? He says, never mind, man. Settle down and things can be all right. And I says, okay, I'm here. And one of the things with many of us who travel abroad, we have this ambitious way about us. Because when I contact home, the Maori people, firm at home says, anytime you want to come back, a job is there for you. Because right now we have a big competition is going and it's going to be busy. And we need salesmen like you. With all this assurance. But then I said, so imagine you give up everything. You come here to England, this big what a country you read so much about. Are you going to go back home empty-handed? And my ambition was above that. I says, no. I said, whatever it is, I'm going to stick it out. I says, I'm sure this is not the only job around. I'm going to go job hunting. But as I says, I have to start working and building a good relationship with the people around you. And then I says, okay, I'll give it a try. I'll give it a year or two. But eventually I'll give it 28 years. 28 years I've undergone extreme pressures and still coming out of it now, this moment in time, I'm out of it. I have no regrets because I don't like to do something in life and then feel sorry after. You do it with an intention. You look, a way forward for something, and it hasn't worked that way. And there's so many things that goes around a situation like this with us immigrants who came over here. And if time affords me, I can give you some ideas. You ask any one of us, anyone West Indian, ask your mom, your granddad, what was his first decision when he's coming here? And immigration says, well, how long are you going to stay? We all say 5 years. And that, to me, was very truthful. I says, I'm going to spend 5 years, I'm going to do this, then I'll go back. But what happens when you come in here now? Then you start get involved in the society. And then you suddenly find that 5 years begin to stretch and stretch. And then you realize, well, I can't live like that on my own all the while. Then you start getting involved in the raising a family. And you get intertwined with the economics of the town, and your time just go on and on and on. And these were some of the factors that basically got many of us still in and around.
I'm just going to retrack you a bit and think about the first time that you came to Wolverhampton after arriving in Southampton. Can you remember how you felt? Like the weather or the smells?
Right. I can put it in one word. I felt terribly disappointed. Because your expectation, remember, you just read about England and what it can offer, what it's like. And maybe when you go to the movies, you'll see some background thing about England. And you have one perception in your mind,
What did you expect from England?
Well, I expect when you come here, you're seeing nice big places and, wide open and, because basically my country that I'm from, it's very flat areas and things are so different. So when you come here, everything is just plugged in together. When you realize these chimneys are houses, and you get in these houses, there's 4 and 5 of you to one room, and it was a different thing altogether. So it brings a lot of regrets to you right off without even getting any further. But as I says, like myself, many other people decide, okay, we're here, we're gonna give it the best shot. But there were still a lot of obstacles in our way in terms of the society in which we live, the things you're gonna come up against. Find ourselves coming up against a lot of racist attitudes. People don't want you here. You're going to a bar. We can't serve here. We're going to serve you there, and all sorts of. And I says to myself one day, do we expect to live in a situation like this forever and a day, or for how long we're here? And many other people were saying the same thing. And so we decided to go about getting ourselves together to try to fight off these evils. But it says fight, I don't mean in a physical matter. Just to get ourselves together, try to be strong, try to fight some of the evils of society. And that's when we start forming these various organizations. I remember at the time, that's in 1961 when I began to get involved, there were 2 organizations I think were going. One was the Parents and Friends, and I couldn't remember what the other. Anyway, we formed one that was named the Wolverhampton Commonwealth District Association. And we start fighting these racial issues. Well, at the time there were a lot of violence and physical thing was going on around. You go to a bar next to you now, it's a fight. They turn on you as a black person to knock you about. Then other black persons see that and they get involved. And this was this kind of a scenario going on. And until we decide we're going to form these organizations, we're going to get people together, we're going to get them to fight the evils. And that would give rise to places like this, the Cultural Center. We fought for these things over the years. And as racism as we know it, it's a very evil thing. It's a disease. And they're still trying to get the formulas to eradicate racism, which I think in some shape and form will still exist to a minimal way, because it doesn't matter what you do, we'll never kill it off completely, but we can control it. And by doing that, basically when we get together like this and we form these organizations so that we can put our brain together, if something is happening out there, we can approach the heads of society in a more formative manner. And as I says, during those times we have met a lot of difficulties. And I can give you an experience. I never experienced it. There's a friend of mine, a workmate of mine, and I don't think it's a rude gesture when I make it, but I think it's about 8 of them were living at in an accommodation at down Penfield. And this woman that accommodated them, I think she's an Irish background. I think it's about 8 to 12. And part of their, what they pay for their accommodation involves they're having breakfast. They'll have breakfast in the morning, toast, button, and cups, mugs of tea and everything will be laid out on the big table, and everybody have. So one morning, one of the chaps coming from work, a Sunday morning, and at that time, the delivery persons usually put the bread and the milk and everything on the doorway. And those times, bread wasn't wrapped, right? So this was packed, put there. So one of my friends was coming from work on the Sunday morning, and much to his surprise, there was a dog, feet in the air, and having a piddle on the bread. So he went in, when he got in, his first job was to filter the information to everybody. And he says, don't eat that bread this morning. There was a dog out there having a piddle on the bread. So everybody aware of that. So this lady went through her normal task of preparing the breakfast, buttered the breads and everything. And when she realized about 10, 11 o'clock, the bread was still standing there. And so she called them together and said, well, what's happened to this bread? Everybody said, well, we don't feel like having any bread this morning. She said, okay. I said, well, I'll tell you a lot now. If you don't eat that bread, by this evening you got to find yourself somewhere to live. At that time you couldn't find nowhere to live. And who has got a room accommodation is chock-a-block. So they finally decided they got to eat the bread. So you can imagine some of the look on their faces when they're going through the bread and just turning up their nose. But eventually they had to eat the bread in order to maintain their accommodation. So that is something I never ever forgot. I always remember. And these are some of the hardships that we had to face in order to be here.
You mentioned that you were for 25 years at Goodyears in
28 years.
20 years
Yes.
at Goodyears. Can you tell me a bit more about your work situation?
Yes. After about 15 or 20 years in Goodyears, I was very, very active with the trade union movement, Transport and General Workers Union. As a matter of fact, in the early 60s, there were no recognition of union in Goodyears industry. And I was one of the chaps who jointly, with many other colleagues, white, Irish, all put together, started fighting the issues for recognition, which in 1962, thereabouts, eventually we were successful. And as I said, I was very concerned about working conditions and put together. And I always go around canvassing and letting my voice heard. I was even branded as a little troublemaker one time. And then I suddenly decided I must get myself a bit closer to the union movement, and I asked the question why there's so much black people is working here and we got no black representative in the union. And I fought the issue, and successfully I was one of the first black shop stewards in my area. And up to the time of leaving, I'm not giving credit to myself, but up to the time of leaving, I had a very good word. People has got a very good word to say on my behalf when I was their representative. We used to have many strikes, shut down, walkouts. When I got there, I cited one of the reasons. And I says, I'm going to reshape this part of the company's agreement. Their disciplinary procedures or whatever was it. And part of their scenario was if you, as a worker, and you have got a little grievance, something has happened, you will first report to your immediate supervisor. If he cannot correct the situation, then you will pass on to the foreman. If you don't get any satisfaction, then you'll go to management. If you don't get any satisfaction, then you go to the union. So I decided, I said, no, this can't work. So I put myself into action right away. And I tell my chapter, says, if you got any grievance, you got anything, go to nobody else but me. And this started going on. So my immediate manager called me in the office. Yes, Gonzalez, yes, since you become a shop steward, we've noticed that you're changing our procedures in handling complaints. I said, yes, I would admit that, but equally so, I want you to have a look. Did you have any disturbance on the shop floor since I've started doing that? Look, he says, no. I said, right, that's the reason. He said, well, explain it to me, then what do you think? I says, I know our people very well. And if I'm an operator and I got a grievance and I discuss it with my supervisor, he gave me no satisfaction, then I go to the shift foreman, I get no satisfaction. I have suddenly looked at myself and said, well, look, I'm not going any further. Because firstly, I'm going to be branded as a troublemaker. Yeah, and that problem still remains there on the shop floor. And many other problems of this arise and still remains on the shop floor and never been dealt with. And eventually one day, you have a massive shutdown because of these problems. This is now when my operators in confidence come to me as their representative and tell me about the problem. I says, I then take it to top management and it's been handled. And you can look on your records to see that many of these problems we never had any shutdowns. So he says, one good look, he says, it's a good job we got some of you people to give us some ideas. So I said, now on the shop floor, not because we are black people, we've got a lot of ideas. We can participate in many things. And I tell you what, that opened the door, and we have had many other shop stewards follow my footsteps and things. Even until now, I've met a lot of chaps. Hey, Spady, when are you going to come back? Well, normally calls me Spady for short. When are you going to come back? When we can't get good days. We can only remember the good days when you're there. I says, well, things and times have changed and more so. I said, I'm officially retired, so nobody's going to have an old slag like me hanging around the shop floor causing trouble. Yeah, so these are part of my, and I had a very good relationship with the union and with the company, and then suddenly I decided I'd just like to be there. And one good thing in a working environment, when you get up first thing in the morning and oh, not again, I got to go to that, when you have a good environment, you get up in the morning, you're just glad to get there, or meet your friends and meet your colleagues, and it enhances your work situation. And that's why I spent that much time there, 28 years.
You talk about friends. Can you tell me a bit about your social life and how you had to cope with your social life in coming to this country?
Well, basically the first thing I would like to point out, being from Guyana, and in this town, you wouldn't find very much Guyanese. You'll find mostly Jamaicans and other minorities from other islands. And that's one of the first things you've got to build new friendships. And I can assure you this, my best friends and associates are from Jamaica and other islands just a few guys we got there. We are all socialized together, and I always find it a pleasure to be between this kind of a situation, the sheer idea. We sometimes get into not confrontation of such. Somebody goes, "Oh man, I don't want to hear nothing from you from small island, you small island boy," you know, that kind of a discussion. And I says, "ISPD, is it now you've got to let your friends know geographically, right?" I mean, I says, "Look, man, you can't call me small island man. I'm not from no small. Oh, those small island people." And I said, "No, let me, not educating you. I'm just putting in the picture." I says, "Guyana is a massive country. It's on the continent of South America. It's just between Brazil and Venezuela." I says, "And we X and X and X among times bigger than Jamaica, and so that many other small islands. So if you still choose to call me a small island, it doesn't make any offense, but I'm just putting in the right picture." And we just exchange these kind of conversation, and we educate each other. And I even take privilege, and I went to Jamaica 3 times, And I says, I've got friends over there as well, I've got friends there. And I think, when I look at the whole picture, I think that's how the world should live. Stop trying to personalize yourself and make yourself over and above anybody. No, just come together and share each other common way of life, and you find it's more enjoyable. Now that we realize, many of us, I'm here from 1960, that's going 40 years, you realize that you got nowhere else to go unless fortune comes your way in way of the lottery or something, that you can go and light yourself a fire somewhere else. Until then, you got to stop here. So your best way is to socialize with people who is around you, and learn that people will love you and people will like to be where you are, and you do the same. And life is very much happier that way, to me.
What about romance?
Romance.
Yes.
I'm a romantic fella. Being being a Piscean, you always read about Pisces, and they're always full of romance. And when I say full of romance, we've got our likes and dislikes. But I think in the main, if many Pisceans are like myself, we are fun-loving people, and we are easy to get on with, and we are a bit romantic, and so do many others. But we play our part. As for me personally, I never like a quarrel, for a start. Whether in the home, I like a peaceful home. And I always tell my missus, who happens to be a Jamaican at this time, and she knows my principles. I don't quarrel. If we have a bit of a misunderstanding, it mustn't last through the day and through the night. Now, when we get home and we get into the bed, there must be a loving feeling. For many other reasons. For instance, now, you might go to bed in confrontation. You're not speaking to me, I'm not speaking to you. Turn our backs on each other. But during the night, something wrong. And either side might be getting some kind of bad feelings, whether the heart attack or, you need a little bit of help. So you're going to summon the person next to you, and something is happening. Right, I don't want to know. I'm not speaking to you. Turn your back, and not knowing that you are suffering. She probably thought you want some other thing to share, which says we're not talking, and that's it. But you would say, next she got up in the morning, you're a dead person. Either way. And it all comes through to the fact that you went to bed in confrontation. Whereas a little bit of help could have saved your life. So I always look at it from that point. I says, doesn't matter, we can fuss all day. And when it comes to night to we go to bed, you forget it, right? And that's the type way I like.
So you mentioned that your wife was Jamaican.
Yeah.
How easy was it to meet a partner, bearing in mind that you were immigrants, and as you said, there were not a lot of Guyanese in Wolverhampton at that time. Lead me up to the events if you can.
Can you switch it up?
Switch it off. Pause it.
Pause.
Please.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Bearing in mind that a lot of people in the Caribbean probably left families backseas, how did you create your own families and own circle of friends in those days?
Being over here,
Yeah.
yes. Well, as I said, when you set out on an adventure, I call it this an adventure, you put into your mind certain perspective. Obviously, you says, well, I'm going over there to another country. I want to make the best life for me and my families or whatever.
Stop. You would have left a lot of friends and family back home in Guyana. So how did you create your own new family with people who you met at work or socialising with?
Yes, that's a very interesting question, because from the time you realize that you're in a strange environment, you decide, well, you can't live alone on your own. You have to have friends, and you have to have. So you set about right away to test the ground of friendship with people in and around you. And I always, boy, start off where I'm living at home. I make sure I tell everybody good morning. I always strike up a little conversation, like a building block to good friendship. And by doing that, people begin to appreciate you. Because as you know, some people are very within themselves and reluctant to come out, to talk to people. I used to make sure I talk to people, communicate, and by doing that, people find me very easygoing, and then friendships start to build as you go along. And even to this day and age, I think if you go around now and ask many people in and around Wolverhampton town, and I think you'll hardly find much people to say anything bad about me. They'll always say, Spady, oh, he's a good lad, he's very friendly. I learned to live it that way, and up to this day and age, that's the way I perceive.
What about going back on the socialising point, and you talking about setting up places like this? What about other places where black people would congregate? Can you remember any of those places?
Yes, as I said, I do a lot of voluntary work in the society. As I said, going back from 1962, I've been involved with everything up to this day, and does a lot of voluntary work. And I always try to create places for black people to congregate. I remember a very dear friend of mine who is very active as well. His name is Mr. Don Richards, well-known character about. Myself and him and a few more others, we had the St. Peter's Unemployment Group, where we set about setting up places where people who's not working, they can come and they can do little bits of sewing, carpentry, discussions, and we go so nicely, and it was very well attended. And these are the little aspects I always think about other people and how you can make other people comfortable. And it brings me back now to the cultural center, which is this place in its existence from 1983. And from that time to now, I'm still part of it. I've spent a lot of hours here, unpaid hours, just to make sure that people have got somewhere to come to congregate, can sit and have a meal. We got pensioners group, we have the youth movement, but something to always get people together. Let alone we have our entertainment at weekends and friends and families. And one thing I'd like to point out clearly where that is concerned, which is one of my basic reasons of helping to maintain this place. Many of us who's not retired persons, we are unemployable, we are grown-ups, right? People cannot at all times find the finances to go to nightclubs and to wine bars at our age. So it's always nice to see people come here to the cultural center where they meet their old friends. We share, laugh and a joke. When you're coming out in the evening, you says to the missus, put your clothes on, girl, let's get out to it. Where are you going? We're going to the culture center, okay. I wonder if Jane is coming. I wonder if they'll get on the phone. Oh, I'm going down there. Are you coming down tonight? Yes, I'm going down. This kind of communication still exists. And they come there, laugh and a joke. They walk with sandwiches on a Sunday evening. They sit down, they have a drink. And it just makes life goes on much easier rather than trying to socialize in the nightclubs or the wine bars. Which wouldn't be our lines. So basically, places like this that we help to create, we do our best to make sure we keep it intact.
What do you think has been the most, some of the most significant changes that you can see from arriving here in the 60s to now, 2000?
No, that's not a very good question. Changes, I am very much surprised to the change that Wolverhampton town has made over those years. As I says, going back into the 60s, this place, Wolverhampton, like many other black country places, it's all work. Yeah, you can get up to 6 jobs in a day and things like that. But things have suddenly changed. It's a more social environment that mixed with work as well. There's a mixture. And as I can see, Wolverhampton, has grown from just an industrial place, a very vibrant town. You were surprised to see that the young people, they're busy at weekends, having their own social get-togethers in the wine bars, etc. Coincide now with places like this that accommodates the elderly, the grown-ups, and right. So Wolverhampton has moved a very far way ahead in terms of socializing and changes. Plenty of offices, economics, the economics of Wolverhampton has gone up, and much praise must be given to local authorities who have injected a lot of efforts and money to change the standards of Wolverhampton. Yes, there is a lot of significant change in Wolverhampton.
For black people, what do you think the differences are for a black person now and for a black person who arrived in the 60s?
Well, basically, again, one of the difference that and we're move away from this social environment. we talk on the economic side. In the 60s and 70s, thereon, they hardly find black entrepreneurs. But at this moment in time, there's a lot of young black entrepreneurs doing various little things, slow, but it's a way forward. And when you couldn't find any black outlets to do, you're finding a lot of black outlets now. And that's a very significant thing and a very, very good move. And we're only hoping that people push ahead a bit more. You may find it in the Asian society, they're going ahead. Well, we are coming ahead slowly as well, and that's a very good thing.
What about other achievements? You mentioned that you was the first black shop steward.
Mm.
Have you had any other things which you are proud of?
Yes. Well, two things actually. Two things I would point out. One, in 1981, I was invited to Buckingham Palace, Her Majesty's garden party, and that mainly, the reason for that is I was working very hard of getting people together, and my government, through the embassy in London, was giving a certain amount of recognition to people like myself who was trying to get people together. And I was mentioned, and I was given the privilege of attending Her Majesty's garden party in Buckingham Palace. And that was a good achievement. And my other achievement that I've had last year, it was for voluntary work. That was presented to me by the then mayor, Mrs. Stafford Good, who presented me a certificate on behalf of my voluntary service I give to the community. And I think those are very precious things for me. And I would only like that many other people should try to follow in my footsteps. So,
when you say my government, is that connecting yourself back with Guyana?
yes, it's part. But what they were doing, what the government were doing at the time, is that people from various locations, various areas, whether you're forming, as I said, we formed that St. Peter's Unemployment Group, and things like that. They were sending out questions and asking who in which areas trying to help people, not only in a political scenario, locally and collectively. And I was mentioned that I does a lot of work for getting people together in and around. It couldn't be politically based because we only had about a dozen Guyanese in Wolverhampton, so it wouldn't worth a while. It was more than that. It was on an open field. So my name was mentioned, and luckily I went, and that's one of the events I always remember. And secondly, I've had that voluntary, which is a spin-off from the same thing. And those are moments that you think what you were doing is very worthwhile.
So reflecting back on how many years, about 40
40, yeah.
40 years,
Mhm.
how can you sum it up?
In terms of
Meaning, for those 40 years, do you think about going back to Guyana, or are you glad that you made the trip to come?
I wouldn't deny myself the fact in saying if I were given the chance to go back to Guyana, surely I would have done so. But for some reason, I'm here and I'm happy, I'm comfortable, but there's still that gap is there. If I get the chance to go back, I think it would be ideal for me. At my age and the time that I've spent here. It's a far, long shot, but I still keep it at the back of my mind if the possibility arises.
So do you think that coming to Wolverhampton in the 60s has made you the sort of man that you are today?
Yes, yes, yes. I'll tell you something, and I wouldn't term it as being political. I like to think about people and the aspects of people like myself, and I can remember I threw myself into the political arena, and I got a good hammering, but I didn't mind because I think I was doing the right thing. It's going back to when our people start coming into this country. And we all had a basic plan. We come to stay 5 years. And after 5 years, we intend to go back. We find that when we come here, we get caught up in the different scenarios. And that 5 years begin to stretch. Then, as I says, like in the 60s and 70s, we start raising families. Now, if you were a woman here in 1970 and you got married to me in that time, and we start making children, first thing that we sit down and say, girl, well, that plan that we had to go back to Jamaica or to Guyana, it's a different thing now. We start having family, we buying a house, we're doing this. So that plan was shelved. Okay, you get a child in 1970, let's say 1986, 87, that child is grown up, keeps going up. Then one day you're going to say to the, well, see, girl, you remember we always had it in mind to go back home. And because we get married, we start getting children, we have to put that plan aside. Okay, that child has grown up now, she's gone her way. What about that plan? Yes. At that time, as soon as you're thinking of bringing that plan back into play, there's redundancies, job losses everywhere. So what happened? Everything just collapsed. And I look at that situation one day, and I says, I'm going to do a little research on my own. So I went out, talking with people of the over 40s, going to the betting shops and the pubs and everywhere. Man. I said, well, look, old man, what, man? Are you at work? No. Oh, you're tough, you know. And right now, we just try to lift me head up and the people they make me redundant. And I said, well, you think it would be a good idea if you get some money and you left this country and make us... I said, that would be great, you know, man. That would be good. So I pick up this kind of information. And I decide I'm going to filter it and see if... So I used to have meetings with local authority from their organization basis. And I went through the hard work of making a monetary calculation. If a person is off work from the age of 40, and if he lives on to 65, that's 25 years. And if he lives to 70, is more, and is free handout. Useless money, I call it. You got to wait every week when you get your dole money or your sign-on money, which is useless money. So I dropped that plan and I approached the local authority and I said, what about if we make a voluntary situation if a person feels that he can get some money and go back home or go wherever he wants to go, and he being paid a lump sum of money, don't you think it would be a good thing? And believe you me, the press, the Express and Star and Mail Chavant, I'm trying to reintroduce what they call repatriation. And But it wasn't that. I was thinking about these people who get trapped, you know, in their economic life and their social life. There's no more plans. Everything is scrapped. You're not working, the wife's not working, you're getting a free handout only for you to have a meal. You're only existing. So if you give these people an opportunity, you might have a good plan at home, and if you get 10 grand, you start life all over again, the different way. You know, and things like, all you do is you give up your status there. And a lot of people, but the gurus and the political persons jump on it, they target me. And I had to tell them, I said, what you're doing, you're condemning what I'm saying for your personal gains. Because you, as a local authority, you depend on votes. And if many of us left, you lose your votes. That's all you're looking at. You're not looking at the livelihood of these people who are suffering. And it's a situation that goes on up to now. I still got that clipping when they called me all sorts, but I didn't mind. I was just thinking about people, and I'm always like that. Always think about the other person. Well, Wolverhampton has meant a lot to me. I've seen the bad days, and now the good days are just around the corner, and I'm enjoying every minute of being. I'm glad to be a part of Wolverhampton.
Okay, Mr. Gonzalez, thanks very much for making us do this interview.
You're welcome.
Hold on. Say thank you again. He's
Oh,
sliding
you
his head
moved.
with that shut, so-
Oh, you're joking.
He moved. Okay. Just say what you're welcome again.
Mr. Gonzalez, is it Gonzalez?
Gonzalez.
Gonzalez.
Yeah, Vez, yeah.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Yeah.
thanks very much for taking the time out your busy life to help us do this Be Me interview.
You're very much welcome, and I appreciate talking to you. Okay.